Hello everyone, my name is Ray, and so I'm the technical winemaking support for Enartis Pacific. And Joshua Karasik from Enartis USA is also joining us today, and he'll be doing a discussion on the products that were going to mention in the presentation and on their application and experience in the US industry. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started with the presentation, and we'll just turn off our video for now so everyone can focus on the PowerPoints.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another of our webinar series. My name is Ray Chen. I'm the technical winemaking support for Enartis Pacific. I'll be presenting on this webinar, and the title is Driving Fresh and Fruity Style White Wine. Joshua Karasik is the winemaking specialist at Enartis USA, is also joining us. After my part of the presentation, he'll share his experience on strategies and oenological tools for making this style of wine in the US production industry. We'll also have a live Q&A session afterwards. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see that there's a public chat box where you can submit your questions. During the presentation, we ask you to refrain from typing questions in the chat box, and then once the presentation is finished, you can submit any questions and we'll address them in the Q&A session. After the webinar, we'll also send out supplementary materials in the follow-up emails. So as next vintage approaches now, we're switching our focus to fermentation strategies and the associated oenological tools. We've decided to categorize the vintage webinar series by theme of wine style, and we'll be focusing on one generic style at a time, and emphasizing on the recommended winemaking strategies as well as Enartis products, and how the combination of these tools will assist the winemaker to achieve the certain style they desire. So for the first one, we're going to be looking at a fresh and fruity white wine style. Here are a few generic parameters when it comes to defining the style of a wine. So first and foremost, varietal characteristic. For fruity white wine, there's an essential factor to consider as we rely significantly on the primary fruit profile, which is partially determined by the variety itself. Secondly, there's aroma and flavor profile, which is further divided into primary, secondary, and tertiary aromas. For fruity and fresh white wine, this style is usually intended for consumption upon release, and emphasizing on the primary aromatic profile, hence winemakers tend to avoid any secondary or tertiary aromas. The third parameter is acidity, which plays a role in creating the best balance of a certain wine style. So for fresh white wine, malolactic fermentation is usually prevented. This leaves the wine with a higher malic acid concentration, which also correlates to the perception of freshness. Then we have sweetness, both actual level of residual sugar and the perceived sweetness. So for this style of wines, they tend to be made dry. However, there are also some producers making wines with some level of residual sugar to balance out with the acidity. Mouthfeel-wise, we think of either mouthfeel being soft, creamy, crispy, structure, etc. And for fresh white wine, as the wine does not see long period of maturation on lees, they're usually described as crispy and lean. And the last parameter is the general impression of the wine. So this can be anything from an impression of a house style, a region, or new word versus old word, etc. Here I've listed some of the most commonly seen white varieties intended for use of making a fresh and fruity white wine. Firstly, we have aromatic varieties. So these are the varieties of grapes containing naturally high abundant aromatic precursors, and some of them contains high level of a certain group of aromatic compounds, which contributes to the predominant characteristic of the wine. For example, Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, they both comprise this high level of thiols. Riesling, Viognier, and other varieties such as Muscat or Gewürztraminer also falls into this category. And then we have the neutral varieties, the most common example being Chardonnay and Pinot Gris. These varieties comprise less aromatic precursors and tend to produce wines with a lesser aromatic and flavor intensity compared to varieties such as Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling. As our focus for making a fresh and fruity white wine is to emphasize on the primary aromatic profile, so for neutral varieties, we'll like to maximize the potential by combination of winemaking strategies as well as oenological products. And for aromatic varieties, to allow the aromatic precursors naturally present in the grapes to be fully extracted and retain the fruit intensity once the fermentation is finished. So outside of paying attention to the aromatic potential, there are also other key points during the winemaking process which needs to be carefully monitored in order to achieve the best potential for such style. So we'll go through the following 5 key points step by step and outline any essential considerations on winemaking strategies, as well as suitable products to apply at each time point. So in the vineyard and at the crusher, the key points would be protection for the fruit against oxidation, as well as microbial contamination. At the step of maceration and pressing, again, we have to pay attention on protecting the juice from being oxidized, avoiding extraction of any undesirable compounds, and promote extraction of aromatic precursors from the skin. Clarification and must adjustment is the next step, where you can adjust your chemistry parameter of the juice, either by acid or sugar addition, and reduce the solid contents in the juice by either flotation, settling, filtering, or centrifugation. At inoculation and fermentation, we'll talk about how to tailor the desired flavor profile by the choice of yeast strain based on different enzymatic activities, and then accentuate the desired profile by pairing up yeast strains with fermentation co-adjuvants. And finally, once fermentation is completed, we'll talk about how to take actions for stability's sake of the wine. This includes protein, colloid, tartrates. And once the wine has achieved these stability standards, we'll also have to consider proper storage condition for wines prior to bottling to maintain the freshness and fruitiness. So to start with, at the vineyard and crusher, here are the main oenological strategies and control points. So the wine's life cycle starts in the vineyard, and having clean, ripe fruit to start with will save the winemaker a lot of headache down the track. Of course, this will be the most desirable scenario. However, the unforeseen nature of vineyards and any other sort of agriculture production means that any sort of adverse weather events close to harvest might significantly impact the final quality of the fruit. Especially for recent years, we've all experienced increased number of these extreme events all across the world. The most common situation a winemaker might come across would be either having to harvest grapes that are still unripe due to logistic constraints, harvesting grapes that are unevenly ripened due to unfavorable fruit set or flowering, and having compromised fruits caused by high disease pressure. When it comes to green fruits or compromised fruits, manually harvested grapes shall be sorted at receival, where you can manually reject any unhealthy fruit, as well as removing MOG, material other than grapes. For machine harvested grapes, as fruit tends to be crushed upon receival, sorting will need to be carried out in the vineyard prior to harvest, which incur additional cost in labor. Protection against oxidation is important, especially when you're harvesting at warm temperature, or the grapes need to travel a long distance to arrive at the winery, and the transportation vessel or vehicle has limited temperature control. So sulfur is the most common additive to utilize for this purpose, but there's also other products to consider, such as ascorbic acid, antioxidative tannins, or blends of different components to achieve a better efficiency, as well as reducing the use of sulfur, so your wine will end up with less total sulfur at the time of bottling. Temperature is another crucial factor. As cooler temperature reduces the rate of oxidation, it preserves primary aromas and reduces the activity of any spoilage microbes. Therefore, harvesting at night is very beneficial, especially when daytime temperature is elevated. And this can be easily carried out in a machine harvest setting. So chilling the grapes as well during transportation also serves the same purpose. So if you have access to an insulated vessel for transportation, such as a refrigerated truck, this can be very handy. And lastly, sorting the grapes, as we mentioned before, is very crucial for rejecting any compromised or green fruit, especially during cool years or poor vintage when the grapes require a little bit more attention. So we have different tools, such as optical sorter, which is a fantastic machine. However, due to the huge capital investment and the lengthy process, this is more justifiable when you have premium or ultra-premium fruit. Otherwise, manual sorting can also vet out undesirable fruits and MOGs. So what if you're machine harvesting and have seen signs of, for example, botrytis in a vineyard? In this case, here are some oenological tools which come in handy at times of harvest. So the most prevalent microbial concern at harvest would be botrytis cinerea. Botrytis is destructive to the fruit as it produces lactase enzymes, and these enzymes, when it comes in contact with grapes, quickly oxidize a range of different compounds, causing browning in the juice and release undesirable aroma compounds, often described as having a moldy character. So when your fruit is already compromised or partially compromised or have seen signs of microbial contamination, what you need to do is to prevent further damage as soon as possible by protecting the grapes with antioxidative as well as antimicrobial agents. Now, sulfur is the most commonly used additive to combat botrytis infected fruit. However, you'll require a higher level than usual in a range of from 60 to 100 micrograms per liter, depending on the severity of damage, due to the increased risk of oxidation from lactase, obviously, and also because there is likely to be a higher than usual population of other undesirable microorganisms if botrytis is present. The downside of that being if you're adding such high level of sulfur in the vineyard to start with, and depending on the yeast strain you choose for fermentation, as they also produce various levels of sulfur as part of their metabolism cycle, at the time of bottling, you're likely to have a high level of total sulfur in your wine. You can also experience higher production of acetaldehyde and hydrogen sulfide during fermentation. So to avoid that, there's a few alternative products to consider. So Enartis AST is a blend of 50% ascorbic acid, 30% PMS, and then 20% hydrolyzable galactannins. These components work in synergy that the ascorbic acid, as a very strong oxygen scavenger, will react rapidly with oxygen, preventing the lactase enzyme to react with oxygen. And then the byproduct from it is hydrogen peroxide, which then will be captured by the galactannin portion in the blend, enhancing the action of sulfur and help maintaining sulfur's effectiveness in regards to its antimicrobial properties. So by using AST instead of pure sulfur, you're reducing the quantity of sulfur in pre-fermentative stages, whilst maintaining the same effectiveness against oxidation and microbial spoilage. Enartis Stat Micro M and Enartis Tan Blanc are the two other products you can use in conjunction with a lower sulfur addition. Stat Micro M is an activated ketosine-based product, and ketosine strongly inhibits the growth of all different spoilage microorganisms, hence can be used as an alternative for microbial control. Tan Blanc consists of pure hydrolyzable galactannins, and galactannins have excellent antioxidant and anti-radical property. So when using in conjunction with sulfur, it can significantly strengthen the antibacterial and antioxidant action of sulfur. AST can also be applied to unripe fruits with green characters. When we refer to green aromas in wines, there are mainly two sources. So methoxypyrazines, which is abundant in varieties such as Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon. This gives notes like herbaceous green bell pepper. And we also have the group of C6 compounds, and these are the green compounds found in unripe grapes, which give a pleasant green aroma such as tomato leaf and cut grass. So with AST, as the product offers antioxidant protection, this will limit more formation of these C6 compounds due to the enzymatic oxidation of the lipids. On the two products we've mentioned to pair up with sulfur to combat botrytis, Stat Micro M targets mainly the botrytis itself. So the activated ketosine inhibits the growth by altering the membrane structure, hence leading to less production of lactase enzymes. This can be also a functional tool for preparing vineyard pied de cuve, as it has minimal interference with the activity of Saccharomyces cerevisiae and other yeast strains. So adding Stat Micro M in vineyard pied de cuve provides a better guarantee for the dominance of the desirable yeast strains and the inhibition of any spoilage microbes. Tan Blanc, the gallic acid 10, on the other hand, works by competing with lactase enzymes to react with oxygen. And due to its nature of being a very versatile and robust oxygen scavenger, so based on laboratory trials we've run, a standard 20 grams per hectoliter addition rate is able to reduce oxidase activity of the lactase enzymes up to 55% in botrytis-infected fruit and juice. Once the grapes arrives in the cellar and are crushed, maceration and pressing will be carried out. So at both stages, protection against oxidation is also very essential. The antioxidative and antimicrobial products we've mentioned in previous stage can also be applied at pressing and maceration if needed. In addition, you should consider the use of inner gas cover, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, or dry ice. So for maceration, control over timing and temperature is crucial to allow the aromatic precursors to be extracted from the skins, but limiting the extraction of other undesirable compounds for fresh and fruity white wine. This includes phenolic compounds, especially catechins, which are easily oxidizable. A typical time frame of maceration ranges from 1 to 24 hours and potentially longer. However, prolonged maceration leads to extraction of the phenolic compounds. And when performing maceration, chilling the juice can allow more control over the extraction speed and reduce the rate of oxidation and microbial spoilage. So we recommend to keep the temperature of the must below 15 Celsius degrees when you carry out maceration. For the extraction of aromatic precursors during maceration, given there is a constraint on the time frame, one way to speed up the extraction would be using enzymes to assist in the breakdown of the skins and tailor extractions of aromatic precursors. This is vital, especially for aromatic varieties, as they contain an abundant amount of precursors in the skin, and by doing so, this allows the precursors to be converted into volatile aromatic compounds during fermentation. For pressing after maceration, considerations should be taken as in which type of press is best suited for this style of winemaking. So for manually harvested grapes, whole bunch pressing, if possible, will provide some benefit appropriate for the style of winemaking, as whole bunch pressings leads to juice with less solids, less extraction of the phenolic compounds, colors, and the steams themselves can provide a channel for the juice to drain freely and very gently. In this case, enzyme assisted aroma and flavor extraction can be added during the pressing. Machine harvested grapes are best suited with the fumatic press, as this provides inner gas cover and can be programmed at various pressure level, allowing to separate the free-run juice with the least solids and phenolic compounds from the press fraction of juice, which might require additional finding to be clarified. On enzyme for extraction for aromatic precursors, we recommend the use of Enartis aroma MP. So this is a microgranulated enzyme with high side activities, secondary activities of hemicellulase and protease on top of the pectinase. These activities allow the breakdown of cell walls and membrane localized in the skin. So here's an illustration of the various components of grapes. And the skin is where majority of the aromatic precursors are contained. Once the cell wall and the membranes are broken down, aromatic precursors located in the vacuole, as well as the ones that are bound to the solid cell structures, will be solubilized into the juice. So using Enzyme Aroma MP will allow you to extract more aromatic precursors rapidly without having to extend the duration of maceration, which leads to extraction of other phenolic compounds. So note that the enzyme also contains protease activity. This is beneficial for early protein stabilization, so you end up using less bentonite once fermentation is completed to achieve protein stability, and we'll touch point on this activity later on. So to back up with some data, here we're showing a fermentation trial with Sauvignon Blanc. We have two treatments. The first batch of wine treated with a straight-up pectolytic enzyme, Enartis RS, and the neutral yeast strain. And then the second batch had Zyme MP paired up with a yeast strain with a high thiolic profile. So we measured the concentration in parts per trillion of two marker volatile thiols in Sauvignon Blanc, 4 mmP and 3 MOH here. And we also measured their corresponding cis-trans isomers. So for 4 mmP, the batch with Zyme MP had 55% higher concentration. And note that the aromatic threshold for this compound is at 0.8 parts per trillion. So even though the difference was only 1 parts per trillion, this still marks a very significant increase. And for 3 MOH here, the Zyme MP batch again showed an increase of 72% compared to the other batch. And the diagram beneath represents a sensory panel we then carry out, asking the panelists to rate the wine based on aromatic intensity, complexity, and typicality from a scale of 1 to 10. With the yellow bars representing the pure pectolytic enzyme with the neutral yeast strain combination, and then the purple bar representing the combination of Zyme MP and the thiolic yeast strain. So note that on the aromatic intensity here, the batch with Zyme Aroma MP received an average rating of 2-folds compared to the other batch of wine. So again, this enzyme is very powerful on facilitating intense fruit aromas and will be a great aid for any sort of aromatic varieties. Moving on to clarification and must adjustments. The purpose of clarification is to reduce the content of solids in juice prior to inoculation to ensure the fermentation goes smoothly, and at this stage is when you typically pectin stabilize your juice as well. So for clarification methods, we have outlined here co-settling, also referred to static settling, filtration, flotation, and centrifugation. Filtration nowadays is rarely used at the juice stage, and for centrifugation, this method is more common in juice with exceedingly high solid contents and high turbidity to start with, oftentimes higher than 10%. However, winemakers do report that with centrifugation, this seems to also stripe out some positive aspect in the juice and results in a wine that's less aromatically intense. So for a juice within the standard specs, most winemakers either consider using static settling or flotation for the purpose of clarification. Looking at the difference between these two methods, as the diagram outlines here, so the main difference is pretty intuitive. You either have solids settling at the bottom of the tank or floated to the top of the tank. In practice, taking into account of other factors, co-settling tends to be longer. It requires chilling to facilitate precipitation, which incur additional cost of energy. The flocks will need to be having high density to settle nicely and compactly. And then you have a higher risk of oxidation of color and aroma due to the fact that the solubility of oxygen is higher when the temperature is lower. So once co-settling is finished and you're ready to warm up the juice in preparation for inoculation, the oxygen absorbed then will react with compounds in the juice to cause changes in color and aroma potentially. Flotation, on the other hand, functions by having the suspended solids attached to the bubbles, which are infused into liquid due to surface tension, and then subsequently get carried out onto the top of the surface. Flotation faces less risk of oxidation, as you're injecting inner gas into the juice to help the solids to rise to the top of the tank. It does not require chilling, so this results in energy saving, and is commonly speedier, especially if you have a continuous flotation unit. One float can take from anywhere from 1 or 2 hours up to half a day, usually, whereas co-settling often needs to be carried out overnight. And for flotation, once the juice is clarified, it can be directly inoculated at a post-floating temperature, so further speeding up the processing time. On top of that, flotation tends to result in a better juice yield compared to co-settling, so it's a pretty fantastic invention overall. With both flotation and settling, winemakers commonly use fining agents and flocculation aids to yield better results. These could be either a single flocculation aid or using a combination of various fining agents. The most frequent ones we've seen are to start with pectinase enzymes to pectin stabilize the juice, obviously. Bentonite, which helps with compaction and settling. Carbon for color adjustment. Gelatin or vegan alternative plant proteins. And silicon dioxide. Once the juice is clear and clean, another common practice in poor vintages especially is to adjust the chemistry parameter of the juice prior to fermentation. In cool years, when the grape's coming unripe or with low sugar content, you can decide to add sugar or juice concentrate to bring up the bome. In hot years, where the grapes come in with lower than usual acidity, tartaric acid addition can be carried out before inoculation. For fresh and fruity white wine especially, there's a strong correlation between acidity and the perception of freshness. So when a wine lacks acidity, it can be perceived as a little bit more flabby and lack of backbone. Tartaric acid is the most widely used acid, but there is also malic and citric acid, and each has a slightly different sensory contribution. For example, malic acid is often described as having a green apple tartness character to it. And another reason for acid addition is to adjust your pH of the juice when it's too high. For white wines, we usually prefer to have the pH kept lower than 3.5 for stability's sake. And this is also linked to the fact that when the pH of the wine is lower, the molecular sulfur portion in your free sulfur will be higher, hence offering better protection against microbes and oxidation. So at this stage, we recommend 2 vegan finding agents based on plant proteins to be used in clarification, alongside the pectolytic enzyme if you haven't pectin stabilized your juice yet. We're focusing on the allergen-free vegan range of finding products, as majority of our customers are now switching to vegan products, especially in New Zealand, as a response of the increasing global market demand. And our experience with plant proteins-based products have been very positive, especially in flotation trials have been shown very comparable results when trials against animal finding agents like gelatin and isinglass. And they tend to be more gentle on the aromatic of juice and wines as well. So the 2 products we recommend here are Plantis AF and Combistab AF. Plantis AF is a pure pea protein, and you can consider this as the golden alternative to gelatin. The finding property is very great for both settling and flotation, and pea protein has a high affinity towards oxidizable phenolic substance, catechins, excessive tannins, astringency, and even metal ions, in particular iron. So it's very much an all-rounder. Combistab AF, on the other hand, so this is a blend of PVPP, pea protein, and silicon dioxide. The pea protein fraction, again attached to phenolics and irons, help with prevention of oxidation. The PVPP has very high affinity to catechins in white must and wine, and the silicon dioxide, with its high density nature, benefits the compaction and precipitation. So Combistab AF is great for juice with a high phenolic content, and the wines can be also viewed as an efficient alternative to potassium caseinate. Here we're showing some data using these 2 vegan products as single flocculation aids in flotation of a Muscat of Alexandria, which is an aromatic white variety. So on the left, you have turbidity and NTU on the y-axis. The gray bars representing the NTU measure 5 minutes after the juice is being floated, and then the red bars represents the NTU value measured half an hour after the juice is being floated. So out of the serial treatments, I've highlighted Plantis AF at 20 grams per hectoliter and Hydroclair 30 at 20 mils per hectoliter. Hydroclair 30 is a low molecular weight liquid gelatin solution designed for flotation, and you can see the NTU levels after 5 minutes and after half an hour were almost identical for the 2 treatments. On the right, we're looking at the percentage reduction in polyphenol content after the juice is being floated, and Combistab AF, out of all the treatments at same level of addition rate, yielded the highest reduction of polyphenol content. So again, if you're dealing with a variety with high phenolic contents or have been historically very susceptible to browning due to the presence of polyphenols, for example, Pinot Gris, you can consider using Combistab AF as a single flocculation aid or in combination with, for example, silicon dioxide or bentonite, which helps with maintaining the intactness of the cap. Now onto actual inoculation and fermentation. With the choice of yeast strains by enzymatic activities, we'll go through these in more details in the following slides. Based on 3 main activities, so Beta-glucosidase activity, Acetyl-transferase activity, and Beta-lyase activity. We'll also be pairing up fermentation co-adjuvants with specific yeast strains to optimize the corresponding enzymatic activities. Besides yeast strains and fermentation additives, 2 other important factors to consider. First off, your nutrients level. So we have another webinar published on YouTube focusing on all the different nutrient strategies, so I won't go into details on nutrients this time, but the main goal is to feed your yeast with enough nutrients, with a combination of both organic and inorganic form of nutrients at different stages when they're required for yeast metabolism. Nutrient management can save you from the headache of dealing with sluggish fermentation and a consequent formation of reductive aromas later on. For nutrient varieties, you can also consider using nutrients, namely amino acids, which can be also used as aromatic precursors and be converted into esters. Physical parameters wise, for this style of winemaking, the standard is to choose stainless steel fermentation tank as a fermentation vessel and maintain a fairly reductive environment during the fermentation. Low fermentation temperature is also desired in order to retain the primary fruit profile. So out of the 3 enzymatic activity, first off, we're looking at beta-glucosidase activity. This is particularly applicable to varieties with high level of terpenes and non-sulfonose precursors, So varieties such as Muscat, Riesling, Chenin Blanc, and Pinot Gris. Some common terpenes in the wine you can find includes, for example, Geranio, which has a rosy scent, and then Lignol, which most resembles the scent of lavender flowers. So what happens is that in juice, your terpenes and orsoprenoids, they are present in conjugated forms, which means that they're bound to a sugar ring, and which makes them non-volatile. So the yeast strain with a high beta-glucosidase activity during fermentation will be able to liberate the terpenes and orsoprenoids from the sugar rings, converting them into volatile forms. Hence, if you prefer a more floral, spicy, a little bit more complex style, instead of focusing on pure primary fruit profile, we recommend to use Enartis firm aroma Y. So this is a yeast strain with very high beta-glucosidase activity, and then pure up with tan citrus. So tan citrus is a fermentation tannin containing abundant amount of these glycoconjugated terpenes and orsoprenoids precursors, and this can further enhance the formation of those volatile terpenes and orsoprenoids. And the second enzymatic activity by yeast strain is acetyl-transferase activity. So what this means is that certain amino acids are able to be converted in the cells to produce esters. And some common esters we find in wines includes, for example, isoamyl acetate, which produces a banana scent, ethyl acetate, which is more related to the smell of a pear, and then phenyl ethyl acetate, which provides, again, a rosy scent. So with the presence of alcohol, yeast strain with this high acetyl-transferase activity is able to cut the branch amino acids and then convert them into esters and release them into the wine. Enartis firm ES181 is a very versatile strain with intense impression of fruit due to this high acetyl-transferase activity. And with the right nutrient, this strain can create a lot of aroma and esters. So we recommend using this strain alongside with Nutrifirm Aroma Plus, which is a rehydration nutrient. And this nutrient contains amino acids specific for the yeast with high activity to produce high ester profile. So for aromatic varieties, this combination can be used to make stylistic differentiation. And then with neutral varieties, the combination substantially enhances the aromatic intensity, so you get a lot of primary fruit notes and floral notes. And lastly, we have Beta-lyase activity. So this one is very handy, especially when you have unripe fruits and the C6 green compounds we've mentioned at the stage of crushing. So yeast strain with this activity, once they're paired up with a fermentation yeast derivative containing glutathione or sulfur peptides, we'll be able to shift the C6 compounds into aromatic thiols, such as 3MH from MP, and they provide notes like grapefruits, passion fruits, gooseberries, box tree, etc. So they transform these green notes into fruity notes. And as this activity produces thiol, this is well suited for a thiol like Sauvignon Blanc or Semillon, as well as for suiting the purpose of diminishing any grain characters in wines. So again, Enartis firm Aroma Y, this is the same yeast strain we recommend for beta-glucosidase activity as well. It also has a very high level of beta-lyase activity. Pairing up with a fermentation co-adjuvant containing sulfur peptide, so you have the option of either Enartis Tam Aroma, this is a fermentation tannin with yeast derivatives rich in sulfur peptides, or Pro Blanco, a manoprotein product with sulfur-containing amino acids. Given Pro Blanco is a manoprotein product, so if you want some mouthfeel and roundness to the wine, you can choose Pro Blanco. Whereas Tan Aroma has better antioxidant property and also benefits protein stability, so you potentially need less bentonite after ferment to heat stabilize the wine. So to recap, here's the three options you have. If you're looking for more floral, spicy, complex aromatic profile, with varieties such as Muscat, Riesling, Chenin Blanc, Pinot Gris, and Gewürztraminer, use firm Aroma White with tan citrus. If you want a very pure and intense fruity profile, pure firm ES181 up with Nutrifirm Aroma Plus, and this can be very suitable for a wide range of varieties such as Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, Pinot Blanc, Sauvignon Blanc, Fiano, Malvasia, etc. And then lastly, if you're thriving for a thiolic profile, choose from Rome White with either 10 Rome or Pro Blanco if you want some least impact and roundness on the palate. Lastly, moving on to post-fermentation stage. At this time point, we look at protein stability, so the use of bentonite to remove any unstable proteins in wine to prevent haze formation. We look at tartrate stability, so this concerns potassium bitartrate and calcium tartrate formation in the wines. And we have a whole different webinar on YouTube talking about this topic, as well as the application of Zenith, which is our new co-stabilizing additive, if you'd like to check it out. And then we talk about final adjustments like blending and fining and post-fermentation management. So maintaining a relatively reductive environment for the wines, use sulfur and other agents to protect the wine against spoilage and oxygen exposure whilst retaining the aromatic intensity. And I'd like to touch base on protein stability. So you probably remember in the previous section on the presentation, I've mentioned two products, Enartis 10 Aroma and Enartis Zyme Aroma MP. So they both assist in protein stability early on. Enartis Zyme Aroma MP, the enzyme, has side protease activity, so it cuts up the protein into smaller pieces and make them easier to be removed. Whereas Aroma can bind to excess proteins during fermentation. So the point of bringing this up is that bentonite, despite being very effective in protein stabilization, can also remove beneficial metaproteins. It can reduce a lot of compounds related to wine quality and aromatics, and contributes additional metal or sodium and calcium. So obviously, the less we can use, the more aromatics we can preserve in the final wine. So on the right, here's electrophoresis analysis of a comparison trial we've done on a rosé wine, where the trial had 30 grams per ton of Zyme Aroma MP added to the juice at maceration, and then 10 grams per hectoliter of 10 Rome just before primary fermentation commences. So the analysis is carried out after primary fermentation is completed and before any addition of bentonite. And the fraction I've highlighted here is the range of ketonase, so the unstable proteins between 32 to 34 kilodalton. The blue mark indicates that the range of ketonase is present in the wine. So you can see that the control indeed had unstable proteins present, whereas this blue mark is absent in the trial. So this is just an additional benefit for using both products to take into consideration on top of their aromatic contributions. And finally, for post-fermentation fining on white wines, again, the two products we've mentioned at a stage of clarification and flotation can also be applied on the wine. Combistep AF, due to the high affinity towards phenolic compounds, can be used to prevent pinking and remove oxidizable phenolic substance at wine stage. Planus AF can also be used to further clarify the wine to prepare the wine for filtration, and again remove any bitter flavors, flatness, and prevent darkening of color due to the presence of phenolic compounds. So as a final recap, here are the main steps involved in driving a fresh and fruity white wine style to guarantee clean fruit and minimize oxidation and microbial spoilage at crusher and in the vineyard, to maximize aromatic potential during maceration and avoid extraction of phenolics during maceration and pressing, to utilize yeast choice in conjunction with fermentation co-adjuvants to tailor and achieve your choice of aromatic profile during fermentation, and then to retain freshness and protect the wine against oxidation post-ferment. So this concludes my part of the presentation. I will send out the presentation slides as well as a winemaking protocol based on all the products we've mentioned in this presentation with more detailed information on what sort of recommended dosage usually the products have. So if you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact me through the email address listed below. Thank you all for your attention. And now Joshua will take on and talk about his experience with these products in the US.
Can you hear me, Ray?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Joshua?
Perfect.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. Awesome.
Sorry, my connection might be a little bit spotty. I'm joining from the Willamette Valley in Oregon, and it's a rural area, so my connection's a little bit spotty. So hopefully it's not too disconnected. But yeah, I'm happy to join you guys for this presentation and to talk about aromatic white winemaking.
Yeah, so thank you, Joshua, for joining. On the products we've mentioned in the presentation, at the stage of vineyard transportation at crusher, so AST, Enartis 10 Blanc, and Enartis Stab Micro M. What's your experience on the actual product application in the US?
Yeah, so those are actually three really popular products in the US. The AST specifically, I think, is super useful for mechanically harvested fruit, for fruit that might be have a little bit of botrytis infection. The AST is a synergistic blend, so you have the ascorbic acid, the sulfite, and the tannin. As a substitute for sulfite in situations where you have mechanically harvested fruit, I think it's particularly interesting. One way that winemakers apply it here in the US is fruit that's destined for long transport that's been mechanically harvested. What winemakers will do is they'll take the AST and they'll actually just sprinkle it on the top of the gondolas of the picking bins, essentially. And what that does is essentially on the very surface of the grapes, you get like this sort of thin layer of AST just sort of dissolved in the very top layer of juice. And what that does is on the very surface, you drop the pH down to about 2.8 because of the ascorbic acid in the blend. And then what happens is the sulfite in the blend as well, because the pH is decreased at the very top, changes to a molecular sulfite, which is more antimicrobial than when the pH is obviously higher. So you get this sort of protective shield on the top of the fruit, which is really, really useful for long-term transport and for when you have a situation where you might have some botrytis. So galactannin also works synergistically with those two parts in the blend. And so I think the AST in general is used pretty widely as a substitute for sulfite for mechanically harvested fruit. So winemakers like it quite a lot for that purpose. And when we have difficult years where there's more botrytis infection, they turn to that product certainly for those situations in particular. The Tam Blanc as well, if you're looking to kind of lower your sulfite levels, the Tam Blanc also works really, really well for that. It has antimicrobial properties, anti-radical properties, which protect aromas and also prevent spoilage. There's two real sort of enemies of aromatic white wines is microbial spoilage. Obviously, you don't want to have any spoilage because that will completely trump any kind of beneficial aromas that you have. And then oxidation. So trying to limit both of those things is super important in aromatic white wines, obviously. So, the AST does that, and the Tam Blanc alone can also help with that situation. So you can use the Tam Blanc in conjunction with sulfite if you're not keen to use a blend of ascorbic acid and sulfite and galactannin, or you can just use the AST, which I think is super easy to use and benefits the wine. Stab Micro M in general, I think because we're trying to limit microbial growth as much as possible in aromatic white wines, I think that product has been really, really helpful for winemakers, and it can be applied in a lot of different ways, and it has a lot of different benefits. So in general, Stab Micro M is even gaining traction still today in the U.S., but a lot of winemakers are really happy with its use, in particular because now we know that it has some benefits for lacase activity. We know that it has antioxidative benefits. It helps limit spoilage. So it works well in a lot of different styles, and it doesn't really impact strongly the stylistic differentiation. So it gives you microbial stability, it gives you oxidative stability, it protects against lacase, but it's not going to really drive the style too much. So it allows the winemaker to basically maintain stability without changing too much the style of the wine and the end product. So I think all three of those products really can be used in many different styles, and I think they're particularly useful in aromatic whites as well.
Awesome, thank you. And can you also talk about the maceration enzyme, Enzyme aroma MP, and any trials you've run with the product related to the aromatic contribution as well as early protein stabilization?
Yeah, definitely. The aroma MP is an awesome enzyme in that not only does it increase aromas by sort of breaking down some of the constituents of the skins and releasing some of the precursors that the yeast can then use to make the aromas, but it also has this added benefit of helping with protein stability as well. So, when a winemaker has to go to protein stabilize their wine, they're going to have to add more bentonite. If they use the aroma MP, they'll add less bentonite, so they're stripping less aromas when they're going to protein stabilize the wine, and they're also improving aromas by by getting those precursors out of the skin. So it's really, I think, an awesome product for that reason. And the pectolytic activity of it is good. It's not as good as something like our Zyme RS. So you can use it in combination with the RS if you really want to get super rapid clarification. But if you're just doing like cold settling overnight or flotation, then I think the pectolytic activity is sufficient. But in terms of using that product for boosting aromas and increasing freshness, I think it's really, really good, and increasing yields as well. So there's a lot of benefits to using that one.
Cool. And lastly, can you talk a bit about the choice of pairing up specific yeast strengths with the fermentation co-adjuvants? So the 3 different enzymatic activities we've mentioned in the presentation.
Absolutely. So, I mean, obviously yeast choice is one of the biggest things that winemakers can use to drive style. And in particular, I'm very partial to the ES181. I think when I'm talking to winemakers who are newer to using our products and our services, and they want to try a new yeast from our range, the ES181 for aromatic whites is always my first choice. One, because it's pretty foolproof in terms of its technical application. It works really, really well in many different conditions, and it doesn't have super high nutrient requirements. It's not going to put off any H2S, and in general, the ES181 just creates this sort of massive amount of aromas in the fermentation. So, and the bouquet is really nice. It's not like you're getting too much in one direction. You get a lot of thiols, which is really, really good. So you get a lot of the grapefruit, the citrus, but then you also get this confectionery ester kind of component too. So I feel like it's a balanced mixture of aromas, and that's just amplified. So you just get a lot of aromas, and it's nice complexity within the aromas as well. Certainly after choosing your yeast choice, picking the nutrient is the next step. And I think definitely the Aroma Plus, if the winemakers have not worked with that nutrient before, I think they'll be really, really impressed with the difference that it can make in the aromas of the wine. And in particular, when you combine it with something with a good acetyl-transferase activity like the ES181, you're just going to get a ton of esters with that combination. So you can take the same juice, put it into 2 tanks, ES181 in 1 tank, ES181 with the Nutrifirm Aroma Plus, and you'll have very different fermentation profiles. ES181 with the Nutrifirm Aroma Plus, you're going to end up with a lot of esters, a lot of floral, confectionery, banana, strawberry kind of notes. And then the ES181 alone, let's say you do it with the Nutrifirm Energy, which is more, less impactful on the esters production. Then you end up with a nice mixture of just thiols and esters. So I think that ES181 is certainly a really, really good choice. Aroma White is an awesome yeast in terms of producing a lot of aromas as well. With that one, you certainly want to pair it with a good rehydration nutrient. Make sure you feed it well because it has pretty good nutrient needs, but it will produce quite a lot of aromas as well. Lots of spicy notes and floral notes. So, and then when we look at other fermentation adjuvants like the Tanarome or the Pro Blanco, I think those are probably more underutilized, and winemakers are usually really impressed when they actually start to work with those yeast derivatives. I'm sorry, tannins and derivatives. So the Pro Blanco in particular, I like to use that one, and winemakers find it really useful for taking wines that might be more acidic, so high acid wines. Obviously we like our acidity in our wines. It gives structure, and it's one of the main components of the sensory balance of the wine. But sometimes you might get too much acidity, and the Pro Blanco is really good because what I find it does is it takes wines that can be a little bit harsh in acidity, and it sort of flattens out the harshness of the acidity and spreads it out over the palate. So you get something that has a little bit longer finish, and the acid is a little bit more spread out. So that Pro Blanco is really good for that purpose. And then also you get the benefit of the antioxidant sulfur peptides in the Pro Blanco. So I think with wine styles where you have like a really rich, high acid wine, the Pro Blanco is great. And I think if you're looking at making something that's a little bit more lean and kind of crisp, then probably the tan aroma is the better choice for that situation. So I think between those two, you can also kind of start driving the style in a different direction. So certainly we've given a lot of options to winemakers in terms of how they can change up the styles. And I think all of these tools can benefit, many different fresh kind of fruity styles.
Yeah, and I see a question in the public chat box asking on the alcohol tolerance. So ES181 is a very robust yeast strain, so your alcohol tolerance up to 16.5%, and then for firm aroma white is up to 15%. Yeah, so yeah, thank you, Joshua, for sharing your experience on the product. It's very definitely beneficial to learn about how the product's being used in other winemaking regions as well, and from a different perspective. So now we'll move it on to the Q&A session. So if you haven't already submitted any questions, again, use the public chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And we'll just give you a few minutes to collect questions before we move ahead.
I should also say, Ray, that your winemakers are lucky down there. They have access to pea protein. We still don't have the ability to use pea protein here in the States, and it's something that winemakers are hoping gets allowed by the TTB, because right now we have access to other vegan fining agents like potato protein, but for flotation, pea protein works really well and is pretty cost effective. So we're looking forward to eventually being able to have access to the CombiStab AF and the AFP, but right now we're still waiting on the TTB, which is currently at a standstill. So
yeah.
So it looks like we have a question that just came in.
Can you see on the screen? Yeah.
So Dean Valente is asking reduction in bentonite application by how much? I can comment on that one. From one of the last trials I did with a producer up north in BC, we saw some bentonite finding trials that came back with the control needing up to 5 pounds per thousand, which is roughly, I think, probably 60 grams per hectoliter of bentonite, where the proactive protein stabilization was about 2 pounds per thousand. So roughly 40% of what the typical addition rate was for that wine. So pretty substantial improvement in that one. And that was in a rosé, which I think rosé in particular benefits a lot from that proactive protein stabilization protocol, because you're usually going to do some form of skin contact with a rosé, and that's when you apply the aroma MPs on the skins. And so you'll get, some skin contact with the skins. You'll get your color with, from the extraction. And then, with rosé, you don't really want to throw too much bentonite at it anyways, because you want to try and keep the color in check as much as possible. And you want to try and balance freshness as much as possible. So I think in rosé in particular, that proactive protein protocol works really, really well. It also works in white wines if you're willing to do just a little bit of skin contact, which I think usually benefits a white wine as well. But that's, in my experience, we've seen up to 60% reduction in the bentonite requirements in some cases.
Yep, and the electrophoresis analysis I've shown in the presentation is also from the same rosé trial that Joshua has run in the US. I see someone else also typing some questions, so we'll just give a few more seconds for them to pop up. So we have another question here. The length of time between enzymatic maceration and bentonite addition for flotation. Joshua, can you comment on that?
Yeah, so for enzymatic maceration, if you're using the aroma MP, mostly the activity that you're looking for is during the skin contact, because you're basically breaking down some of the parts of the skins and the pulp. So after your skin contact, after you've pressed out the juice, I would give it probably another hour or two afterwards, just to allow the pectinase to break down some of the pectin before you add the bentonite. Probably what the best course of action at that point would be, if you're not using another pectinase enzyme for clarification, is to do a pectin check before you make your bentonite addition. So after you press out the must, do a pectin check, and then if it's negative, then you can go ahead with your bentonite addition.
Yep, so
looks like maybe we have another question there.
So if stem micro is added early in vinification, is it effective for the life of the wine, or is it removed? So stem micro, the activated ketosan products basically act by physical contact. So there's a lot of different options to how to utilize this product. But for say, if you're adding at juice stage and then you rack off the juice before fermentation, then the product will no longer be effective, because it has to be kept in constant physical contact. But if you're adding, per se, a low dosage during fermentation, that given that fermentation is ongoing, that could ensure that the dominance of the Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast strains during the fermentation. And usually, if you're adding it post-vinification, for say, during storage, it's a very handy tool as well for microbial control in barrels. So per se, to fend off like Brettanomyces. And again, in barrels, so what you do is you give it like a homogenization once in every week or 2 weeks. So to keep the product being resuspended into the wine, and then continue doing that throughout the course of the maturation and storage. So yeah, pretty much a lot of different ways to utilize it, and as long as being keeping in physical contact. And do you have anything to add on that, Joshua?
Yeah, I think it's really useful for that reason. So it's a finding agent for microbes. So you know, when it's in the wine and when it's in contact with the microbes, it's effective and it's doing its job. And when you remove it from the wine, it's no longer active. So it's useful for that reason when you're doing things like trying to control ML during fermentation, or trying to protect a must from you know, from malolactic or some other spoilage. But then, you know, after fermentation, if you press off and after you remove the chitosan, you can inoculate with an ML bacteria and still have the malolactic fermentation go on. So it's really useful for that reason, and that when it's in and it's mixed into the wine, it's active, and when you take it out, it's no longer active. So it's good for that reason.
Yeah. And I think that concludes all the questions we have. Again, thank you everyone for participating. So we'll be sending out supplementary materials and protocol in the follow-up email. And if you have any other technical questions, please feel free to contact myself or Joshua. Or if you have any inquiries regarding the products, you can contact one of our sales members. So we'll be hosting another webinar towards the end of November, focusing on the style of a fruity red wine. So make sure to keep an eye out on the invitation email. And meanwhile, there's also a lot of recorded webinars and technical presentation we have already uploaded on YouTube under the Enartis channel. And we've covered a wide range of different topics from very detailed nutrient management, microbial management using Step Micro-M, all the way to like practical considerations on canning. So please feel free to take a look at those as well. Again, thanks for attending and enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.